Ah, ah, this could be an awesome or a terrible idea. Either way, I was really surprised with what I saw. Hey, everybody, my name's Yvonne, and this is a speaker breakdown. And today, whoo, with all the news about her in the world, we are taking a look at Kamala Harris. Now, I know what you're thinking. Ooh, getting into the political game? New. In fact, in this video, we are not going to take a stance on her point of view or the arguments she is making. We are simply going to analyze her speaking style and find out if it has any value, what works, what could she do better, but most importantly, what can we copy, if anything, for our next presentation. So let's get started. First off, I'm going to play this video without any sound, and we're going to skim through it to see what her nonverbal communication looks like, okay? This is not a flattering start, I admit, but it's the beginning of the video. Let's see what's happening next. Oh. So right away, one of the things I love about what she's doing is she's really opening up her arms, but most importantly, and this is a big one, gang, listen to this. She is varying how she moves her hands. Remember, one of the signs of what I like to call academic speakers, these people that teach you like the insights and the secrets of public speaking, but don't actually do it. They just talk about like their tactics, but they don't actually get up and speak in front of others on topics that aren't theirs, is they always tell you like, this is how you should put your hands. This is how you should put your hands. Like this makes you look like an executive. This makes you look this. And the answer is they're all right and they're all wrong because there isn't one hand thing you can do. In fact, if you only do one thing, it looks weird. It looks fake. It looks put on. Because if we were chilling, like, listen, hey, if you and I were chilling, we're having a coffee, a beer, whatever, we would be moving every few seconds. The next time you're out in a restaurant or a cafe, just watch people and watch how we are constantly in motion. We are rarely still or doing one thing. The only times we are still or doing one thing is when we are scared or nervous. So the secret of really good body language isn't one position, it's varying your position. Case in point, Ms. Harris here. Now, let's break this down a little bit. I'm going to give you a play-by-play. You see, she's opening up, but now she's changing hands. Now she's talking with one hand, and she's moving and she's making big gestures. And this is making her look actually very passionate, very like engaged. And now she's talking on one side of her body, which is another great tactic you can have because people do this when they're natural. She looks so comfortable right now. Why does she look so comfortable? It's because she's varying her body language. Talking on one side of her body, sometimes talking with one hand, sometimes talking with both hands, sometimes putting her hands together, sometimes keeping them apart. So far, one thing she's doing really well is nonverbal communication because look how confident and commanding she seems. Big hands, big hands, big hands. So the next time you are practicing your presentation, remember Kamala. Don't practice one thing with your hands. How much variation can you have when you're speaking? Can you speak on one side of your body? Can you speak on the other? Can you speak with one hand? Can you speak with both hands? Can you be big sometimes and then chill other times? The more you do, the more confident you will appear. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Yvonne, if I use my hands so much, won't it be distracting? The only time your hands will be distracting is when they do the same thing over and over. So if I was presenting and this was the only thing I did, very quickly, it starts looking a little bit weird. Even though I'm trying to sound as natural as I can, this becomes distracting because they're doing the same thing over and over. Because again, if we were out for dinner, we wouldn't be doing that. We would be varying the way we're angling, the way we're moving, the hand gestures we're using. It would constantly be changing. And here's another really cool thing. I actually talk about this in my book. Let's go back. I want to show you something here. Look how she's working with her podium. In general, I say stay away from podiums or desks or what have you. In this context, she has to be there. So look what she's doing. Do you see how she's speaking at noon, but she was just speaking at like 10 o'clock? She looked over to 2 o'clock So whenever I'm presenting, this is noon, this is 10, this is 2. And I'm constantly jumping between these points. And look what she's doing. She's jumping between these points. Why? Because it gives her a sense of speaking to everyone. Here's another way you know if a speaking coach is actually good at public speaking or they're just telling you what to do. They talk about eye contact. And sure, I mean, eye contact is great, but remember, eye contact at its core is a challenge because if you've ever been presenting to a group of people and you lock eyes with someone, that is the moment you forget the next thing you're about to say. That is the moment you stumble because it's an inherent challenge. Also, if you're speaking to 40 people, how are you making eye contact with them? You're gonna be like A, B, C. You can't do it. It's seems like real advice, but it's actually misleading because it isn't practical. So by using the clock, you give everyone in the room the sense that you're talking to all of them. She's breaking up into little sectors and she's constantly moving between them so that the second these guys think she's not talking to them, she's over here talking to them. And so they perk up. Then she's talking over here to you. So she's not only engaging the room, she's once again adding more variation to her nonverbal. Okay. Now that is her nonverbal. Let's now turn the volume on and see what she's saying.
How are we approaching this issue in a way that we also understand we cannot support and help our young people?
Okay.
Don't also look at the context in which those young people.
So one thing that I liked about what she just did is she started with a question stack, meaning she started not just by asking one question, but asking two. I think she's gone off on a bit of a tangent here. It would have been much more powerful if she kept asking questions. Let me give you an example. Let's rewind this a little bit. Good question.
How are we approaching this issue in a way that we also understand we cannot support and help our young people if we also.
So you see, this is when she's gone off, right? That would have been, if she could have stopped the question somewhere around there, that would have been perfect.
Look at the context in which those young people live and are being raised.
What's the context that they're being raised in? Another place. You could have added more questions here to look more insightful, because the cool part about using a question stack is that a question stack, when you ask a bunch of questions, you've primed the audience to do a few things. Number one, to think about their answers. Number two, to think of you as more insightful because you're asking these insightful questions. And number three, it primes them for what's coming next. Hopefully, the answers to those questions.
Not to come out and say, well, we could do this better.
Great, nonverbal.
Part of the extension of the work you.
This is a really great way. You see how she's angling and talking to everyone in the room here? I know I keep talking. I think this is really great. Do you see how she's kind of angled and open up to this part of the room? I know I said we were finished the nonverbal discussion, but this is a way to show both confidence and to engage a whole section of the room.
We'll do is just focused on our young leaders and our young people. But understanding we also then have to be clear about the needs of their parents and their grandparents and their teachers and their communities.
Now, this is a really great example of a repetition stack. But what is a repetition stack? Well, I'm so glad you asked, dear viewer. Essentially, it's repetition as a list where you start the sentence in the same way, but then you end it with something different. So these are all the same and these are all different. And you do like 5, 6, 7 of them. Again, it makes you look very insightful and it acts like the question, engaging people. And they're thinking about, yeah, that's a good point. 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 Let's look at it again and see if you can identify it.
And their teachers and their communities.
Boom. So she hits you with this stack, right, of repetition, and then she stops, and that's powerful. Look at the pause here, because one of the best things you can do, either after a question stack or a repetition stack, is stop for 2 seconds. Let's see how long she stops for.
And their teachers and their communities.
1, 2, 3. Boom. 2 seconds is the perfect amount of time right before it gets a little awkward, but it gives you so much power. If it's 3, 4, 5 seconds, it gets a little bit over the top, but a 2-second pause at the end of something like a list, delicioso.
Everything is in context. My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would.
Okay. Now, people tell you that use stories. It's so important to use stories. And most of the time, we start with the story at the beginning. But remember, if you've been following me for a while, you know this. Uncertainty equals interest. Every good movie, every good book, every good TV show throws curveballs at you in the middle of the show. So you think you're going over here, and then something unexpected happens, and then something unexpected happens, and then something unexpected happens. Putting a story not at the beginning, but in the middle of your story, and at first it seems to be unrelated. It seems to be a little shocking. But now the whole audience is like, oh, now we're talking about you as a kid and your mom. Wait, what's going on? And we're trying to make the connections, which means we are engaged. Again, listen.
Give us a hard time. Kind of an asylum. Everything is in context.
Everything is in context. So we think she's going to keep going on this trend of explaining this idea to her. And here's the curveball.
She would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context.
And then this story relates to her previous topic. So instead of saying, and this is a trap that most of us will do, is we will explain the point of the story at the beginning. So she was saying everything happens in context. You know, my mother used to tell me like, whoa, what's going on? And then at the end of the story, she goes back to context and we're like, oh, that's the point. A lot of the times people say, I'd like to tell you a little story that explains this idea, or I'd like to tell you a story that's about putting things in context. If you preface your stories, there is no uncertainty, and therefore there is no interest, and people will be less engaged, not more.
And what came before you?
1, 2,
So
another good pause.
Extraordinary leaders who will help inform and advise how we think about our work. And like the secretary said, give us feedback.
Yeah.
Give us counsel.
Yes.
Give us direction.
Another little give us repetition stack. Yeah. So a lot of times people use repetition, say it and then say it twice, but by making it a list, it just adds more power. Let's see if she pauses at the end of that.
Give us counsel, give us direction, and how we best achieve our mission.
1, 2.
Fully understand the challenge.
Another question.
The opportunity.
1,
so
2. It was 1 second. Now, here she's just going to go to reading, so I'm not going to bother critiquing that. There's one more thing that I observed, and I'm not sure if you saw it, dear viewer, but I'm about to explain it. The emotional roller coaster. Many times as speakers, we think we have to have more energy than the rest of the room to energize the room. But if you start at a 10, you have nowhere to go but down. The best speakers go up, meaning they start at like a 3 or a 4 with moderate energy, and then build it up. Now, you can't stay up here. And if you try and end on a really high note, it's going to seem a little bit forced. So instead, you do the emotional roller coaster. You start medium, you get high, you chill out again. That's the minimum. In a longer speech, you go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, because that emotional roller coaster means we never know when you're going to get worked up or when you're going to chill. It adds more uncertainty and therefore more interest. So watch Kamala here. And by the way, Kamala, I'm going to talk about one more thing, because of course you're watching, that could have actually improved this speech a little bit more. Overall, very good speech, but there's a couple of things we could have done to take it from an A to an A+. I'm actually very surprised at how much I'm enjoying her speaking style. So first, notice she starts with like a chill energy. Like a medium energy, right? Then she comes up here, she gets very energetic.
Is not to come out and
you know, she starts getting very energetic, right? She's talking faster. She started slower.
Have to be clear about the needs of their parents.
So now when she starts going over here, you see she's getting very animated. She's getting very animated.
My mother she would give us
and now we changed it. So now she's chilling out and she's reminiscing. So we went from like a moderate intensity to a much higher, bigger intensity. And then, you know, my mom actually, so she's bringing us back down. Then she goes back up. She goes back up in energy and she gets big again. But then look how she ends. And she's slowing it down and slowing it down.
Give us counsel. Give us direction.
You see how she did the little energy back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? And a lot of times the best way to end is not up at a 10, but at like a 3 or a 4. So everything is slowing down. So the last few things you say sound profound. Now, I mentioned there's a few things she could have done a little bit better here, right? What are those things? Well, number one, she spoke in third person a lot. With the exception of the story about her mother, she said young people engage in the context and it's important. These are all big general terms, so they don't actually resonate with people. If you use big general terms, right, you need to follow them up with specifics. You have two choices, second person or first person. Talk about someone you know in the second person or about an experience you had in the first person after generalities. So it's like a 1-2 punch. Now, there's a few other things we could talk about in this speech, but I'm actually going to save it for another video, another Kamala video. So if you're enjoying this breakdown, if you agree or if you disagree, post in the comments down below. And here's another little request. Of course, I'm going to ask you to like this video and what have you. But if you would like me to compare and contrast Kamala with Donald Trump, let me know in the comments down below, and I might make a pros and cons video featuring the both of them. Thank you so much for watching Speak and Breakdown. I'll see you next time.